welcome to another episode of Weekend Extra Edition. I am having some technical difficulties. In case you watched Enormous the podcast this last week, hopefully it doesn't stifle things too much. Last week I talked about food, and there's at least one thing with that I need to wrap up. we in community, just getting right into it. Actually, you know what? Pause that. I feel like I'm getting more comfortable in front of the camera. I feel like that's going well. And I think I'm growing in learning how to do this. Preparing for this is difficult because having a one-sided conversation is very different than having a conversation with a person. That said, the point of me doing this not only is to bleed off stress, but it's also to have a conversation. If you feel like this is a conversation that you're enjoying, if you feel like there's potential, if you feel like there's something interesting here, please help me out. Subscribe. Hit that like button and help me grow this channel, because I'd like to grow it. I'd really appreciate it. Feel free to share it. Feel free to comment. Feel free to engage with me. I'm still learning how to engage an audience with this, but I am learning, and I think I'm going to get there. So that's the channel plug onto cult food, part 2. Before we get into talking about relationships, before we do that, I'm going to make sure I'm even recording. It appears that I am. That's awesome. So, when we first started out, there's a couple things I need to talk about. We tried to follow a biblical code, and later when we started reading and incorporating my uncle's interpretation of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we tried to follow a diet that was somewhat like that, which would be, I think it's Leviticus in the Bible that lays out the dietary laws, which is pretty much no pork. There's certain creatures that you don't eat. I just spit. Certain creatures that you don't eat, like shellfish, shrimp, and stuff like that. Even though people did. Pork, not so much. But seafood, my aunt, my uncle's wife, was very fond of seafood. She grew up on the West Coast, along with, obviously my father, or my uncle. So she enjoyed seafood, so she would eat it. And there were no real repercussions for that. And I don't actually, to be fair, I don't believe there was any real repercussions for seafood eaten by anybody. Even though that was a law that was supposed to be followed, but it never really happened. And I think it was largely because of that. And I have no problem with that. Seafood is fucking delicious. So that was awesome. And then it grew to include the dietary law. Grew to include no GMOs. So when we would travel, I went and saw my grandparents and put them through fucking hell because we didn't want to eat genetically modified stuff. We ended up doing it anyway. So it was a huge waste of time and effort on their part. But that was the thing. We'd go to someone's house, we'd stay there, and then they would have to conform to our dietary standards for us to visit them. At least for us, they could eat whatever they wanted, of course, but we had our dietary standards. And just that whole selfishness was and is. Uh, I'm embarrassed about it, honestly. Still feel shame about that. Another thing tying into law and diet, we had a community rule that was also based off of the Dead Sea Scrolls stuff, and a quarter portion of the food that you got was put back. You would put it on your plate. You would put a quarter. When you transgressed the law, you would be on days. Transgression of the law could be saying a curse word. It could be being angry or impatient. It could be, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you could go on days for. When you transgress the law for a certain number of days, you would put on some of the laws. You would put a quarter of your food back, confess your sin to whomever you were eating with or eating around, and then you would eat. When that first started, it was a quarter back, so we were getting like 2 cups of food a day at one point. And I might have my timeline screwed up on this. I don't know. It doesn't matter, honestly, because it's fucking ridiculous anyway. I know that when I was a kid, you would put a quarter of your food back, quarter of the portion of your food back, and you would eat that. And that was that. So you got a minimal amount of food. You're cutting 25% of that food off. You were returning it to the common pot, and then you were eating that. And it was supposed to, I believe, the original concept is it was supposed to be sort of a fast. The problem is, it was all a fucking fast. So I'll get into the concept of the law and days and all that some other time. But for now, just know small portions, 25% was replaced. So, and you're already on damn near no food anyway. So that was a big deal. When we first moved out there, we didn't butcher for a while, and then we started butchering. I believe it started with chickens, and then we later butchered our own sheep, some goats, cows. We said we didn't screw with pigs. Of course, we would catch fish. I caught a lot of fish. I spent a lot of summers fishing and kind of supplementing our diet with fish. I loved fishing as a kid. I haven't gone in years, which I should do again. But anyway, we did our own butchery. So I've butchered, killed, and dressed out hundreds of animals. That was a real hard ship at first for me. That was really hard. It got easier, and then I just said, you know what? I don't think this is for me, and I just quit doing it entirely. But anyways, did our own butchery. I don't know why I thought that was important, but I thought it was important at the time. Relationships. The Hopewell Adena people who were in, I believe, Ohio or the Ohio Valley, something like that, had a stone, and they used tools. Where are you going? Oh, okay.
Stop talking to
Um, these people, I guess, at some point, took a piece of stone and like scratched designs in it. They're kind of hieroglyphic. My uncle believed that God gave him the insight to interpret this tablet, and this tablet he called, I just spit all over the place, again, twice in one video. Keep watching. There's always going to be spit. He called it the family tablet. Admittedly, it does look pretty. I started that sentence wrong, so I'll scrap that sentence. It looks like there's people on the tablet, so I don't think that's a stretch on his part. Whoever, I'm sure the original author intended for it to be a person or people. But he had this whole interpretation that was not anything but really just a toast to the God that he believed in, who was largely a Christian God. So from that was the concept of men and women was pretty well mapped out, gender roles in community. Obviously, there was no kind of homosexual relationship. There was no kind of extramarital relationship. And by extramarital, I don't necessarily mean affairs, although that would affect me personally later. There was no sex before marriage, or there wasn't supposed to be. So all that was all blocked out. Men were supposed to be providers, fueled by compassion and fixing things. They were governed by intellect and reason. Women, their counterparts, were supposed to embody the feelings of unity and joining things together, and governed by emotion and being emotional. So that was pretty 1950s. I'm about out of time. So yeah, there was very little deviance allowed, and by little I mean zero, from those roles, and people were publicly chastised for failing to fit the given model. So, where was I headed with all that? So in a relationship, a man was supposed to be compassionate and providing and intellectual. A woman was supposed to be managing relationships, joining her man, and managing emotions. So, not that either of those things are necessarily bad in and of themselves if you have someone who's like that, but obviously not everybody's going to drop neatly into that slot. See me, an emotional person, but also governed by intellect. Anyway, that was kind of the format that people were supposed to follow. Now, dating, there was not a lot of people, not a lot of young men and women, and so that went awkwardly. I did get married out there. Was married to a woman. She wanted to be with other men. We separated. We got back together. Had a couple of kids. She decided she wanted to do that with her life, so she continued to do that. That's that juicy story. So that all happened, and that was all in the context of trying to practice that whole very straight-laced sort of management of relationships. I think this is going to be short, man. I'm tired as fuck. But there was this huge push for people to be pure, because sex, I guess, was considered to be impure, or giving yourself too deeply to someone. I still don't really understand that whole thing. I think that a lot of this took place outside of good logic, and it was more just trying to justify a traditional Christian value. And it was less about what people actually needed or how people actually are. But I think I'm going to stop there, and for now And reset this because my timer's almost run out. Okay. Let's try this again. Still having technical difficulties. So, families were governed by this tablet, or this piece of etched stone that he got photographs of and then etched his own copies. And there's all of the information was lines flowing and so on. And his interpretation of that, it was what governed or was supposed to govern relationships. So he, through the power of the Spirit, I guess, determined that certain lines connecting certain ways were bringing the feelings of joining and managing relationships to a woman, or intellect and compassion to a man. How compassion isn't an emotion, I'm not entirely sure, or it's an emotion that is governed by logic, who knows. Just spilled water all over myself, so that's awesome. I am a little bit flustered about my memory card. I'm not sure what's going on with that, but it's kind of got me in my feelings a little bit. Anyway, so there was a lot of pressure put on families to perform in a certain way. A lot of pressure put on relationships to behave in a certain way, for roles to be fulfilled, and for there to be a certain level of compliance. For example, when Clinton had his affair with Monica Lewinsky, that was condemned not just for being an affair and sexual activity outside of a marriage. It was also condemned because it was kinky sex, so oral sex was automatically out. I don't remember there being any clear guidelines such as you will use this position or you will not use this position, but kinky sex was definitely something that would, the community definition, and it wasn't even really well defined. That was something that would make God unhappy. There was no, on one hand, there was this over-defining of damn near everything, and on the other hand, there was this vacuum of clarity because it was a subject that made people uncomfortable. I remember as a young man, my uncle took it upon himself to have the talk with me, and I was a teenager. I was in my late teenage years at this time, and I'm not sure what he thought he was doing. I guess he thought that I was ignorant of all this. I wasn't. I read. I understood biology. I asked questions of people that I felt I could confide in. But he had this talk with me, and he told me that during the act of sex, you're not to think about the woman's genitals or any part of that, because that brings lust into the relationship. There was this huge pushback against lust, where lust was defined as being a part of a relationship for what you got out of it, where love was being a part of a relationship for what the other person got out of it. And there was quite a dichotomy. Again, something that was overdefined, the definitions of love and lust, where sex, sexuality, kinky sex, what was not, what positions are good. Obviously, you can't think about genitals because that's a teardrop on the cheek of Jesus right there. But I think it goes without saying that a relationship has two elements, and that is you and the person that you're in a relationship with. And that, the thought was that you just completely put yourself into someone else's life for their sake. And you don't ever think about yourself, and the other person is supposed to do that to you. I'm not a relationship expert at all, but to me that feels dysfunctional. I don't believe that the self should ever be lost. It's you got to think about that. You got to think about you. At some point, it does have to be about you. At some point, you have to consider yourself, sometimes above the other person. If that other person is involved in destructive behavior, or if they just are not the person that's right for you. My first marriage was not very fulfilling. I had to care for my ex in a lot of ways and do a lot of thinking for her, and she spent a lot of time thinking about how to get out of the relationship while still wanting the relationship, which doesn't make any sense, but it is what it is. And my neighbors are still playing music, which pisses me off, but it is what it is, so I hope you enjoy the animals next door having a cookout or whatever. The fuck was I? Oh, the relationship I'm in now with Jeannie. My life took a very different turn when I met her. Just by dint of that relationship, I had to become more confident. I had to become more genuinely me. I had to I had to mature, and I had to be assertive. I had to take care of myself, and she takes care of herself, and we take care of each other, and there's a maturity there that I needed, and so that worked. In community, there was this huge pressure to make it. When I separated from my ex for her infidelity, my plan was to not get with her again. I did make the choice to remarry her. We reset our vows. But that decision was on some level, and I'm not trying to escape my responsibility in this, but I will point out the fact that there was a reasonably intense amount of pressure put on me to fix that relationship and to make it work. I ended up having 2 children that I love deeply, who are wonderful people, as a result of deciding to get back into that relationship. But honestly, I should not have done it. That said, if I hadn't done it, I don't know if I would have left community, because the whole reason why I left community, not the whole reason, but a significant reason why I left community is because I didn't want to put my son through what I had endured as a child. I couldn't do that to him, and I knew that things had not changed to the point where I had an environment that was going to be safe for my son, where I could guarantee that he wasn't going to go hungry and barefoot, that he wasn't going to grow up with the shame of being dirty all the time, or having tangled hair, or shit clothing. I couldn't do that to him, because that was an intense amount of shame. And even now, for me, I joke a lot about my hair, and I try to dress fairly nice. I'm a clean person. The motivator behind that is less about being presentable and more about not being subjected to that feeling of shame that is still in me, because I grew up dirty and hungry and in crappy hand-me-down clothes. Um, so there's that. That whole um, mode of thinking of men and women as very specific, very tightly defined roles, very definitely influenced my family, and I believe very definitely influenced the relationship of my parents. They didn't have an extremely good relationship as a child. What's up? Welcome back. How'd work go? Boring. Um, but my parents, I think, were just very different than those gender roles instructed them to be. I think that my mother had a tendency to be more logical than a woman was supposed to be, or she wasn't as aware of her emotions, maybe, as the prescription called for. I think that my father was more emotional um, than the tablet called for him to be, and so there was a lot of pressure brought to bear on them as parents and as a couple. Um, the big thing, and this was my mother, is that she didn't teach her children. There were things that my mother didn't teach me, obviously, things I had to learn. But she taught me a lot of shit. She was my mom. But that was a constant fiction that was a source of pressure that was always brought on my parents and later just my mother after my father left when I was 16, I think. So there was a lot of meddling in relationships, and typically that panned out as wives alienating their husbands. I'm not sure why that was so prevalent, but I would say that 90% of the relationships that failed out there, and there were a lot, the man was alienated from the family. So there's very definitely something amiss there. I'm not sure what it is, and I'm not sure that speculation would do me any good, but very definitely those expectations of people in a relationship ended a lot of relationships. I mean, one of my best friends from childhood, his family had that happen. My family was that. And there's probably 5, 6, 7 other families that I could name off the top of my head that had that happen as well. Some of them ended up getting back together. Others, they just remained separate. So anyway, that's kind of a downer. But it is, ultimately, it is what it is. And, I mean, I'm fine now. I'm in a fulfilling relationship that brings out the best in me and pushes me to be a better person, which is what I want out of a relationship anyway. I live in terror of stagnation, and I'm certainly not going to get that. As for next week, because I'm already going to do that, I think I'll talk about the law. I think I'll get more into the law and maybe the actual religious structure of the place. Let me know in the comments what you want to hear. You can hit me on Facebook, Twitter, or comment on the video. Either way, let me know. And if you have questions about today, I feel like I didn't do it justice. And, I'll come back and revisit it if I think of how to say it better. But if you have specific comments or questions, I always like to see comments. I try to respond to everyone. I'm not sure that I've done a very good job. It's not that there's so many I can't respond to them. It's just that I forget, a little dumb. At any rate, question, comment, always. Always question me, always comment. Help me fight the stagnation. Part of how you can do that, liking, subscribing, sharing this video, and helping me get out there, helping me meet new people as an audience, and helping me grow. I appreciate all that everyone's done so far. You guys have all been amazing, and it's been really fun. We'll continue to do this. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you need to know, because I'm so close to it sometimes I don't understand what I'm not explaining. So help me out. Anyway, with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Today has been a little bit shorter than maybe past episodes, maybe a little shorter than I wanted to, but with technical difficulties, what are you going to do? Appreciate every one of you. Have a wonderful week, and until next time, I'm done.